It is championship weekend across the country, including Saturday night in the Big Ten in Indianapolis with the Ohio State Buckeyes. 2 losses, Wisconsin Badgers, no losses. Buckeyes a 5-point favorite, though, out of the mighty Big Ten Eastern Division. We bring in Shannon Summers from Silver Bullets podcast to give us some perspective on the Buckeyes and the Badgers. Shannon, how you doing today?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on, Mark.
No, I always like our conversations concerning Ohio State football. You've got your finger on the pulse as well. So before we move on to Wisconsin and the challenge there against the 12-0 football team, your thoughts about the Michigan game in light of the situation that you could almost call John O'Korn a third-string quarterback. It could have been a much different game, some people believe, with Brandon Peters in play. Your thoughts about the Buckeyes' performance?
It wouldn't, to me, as an Ohio State fan, it wouldn't have mattered who was behind center for him. And I only say that based on a simple fact of you can't sit there and say what could have been if this person played, blah, blah, blah. You got to go by what's played on the field. But if you look at Ohio State and you look at 2014, which this year a lot of things seem to be mirroring 2014, Ohio State went and won the national championship with their third-string quarterback. So if you want to complain that you didn't have your quarterback, blah, 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 that goes back to your head coach not having your team and the players ready to play.
Well, I think it can be a complaint if you're talking about from the fan base, but I just think realistically kind of trying to project how good are the Buckeyes defensively, trying to get a better gauge on where they stand, and John O'Korn wasn't the guy to have tested that defense. And, of course, Cardell Jones, despite us not knowing hardly anything about him at the time of the Big Ten championship game right this week 3 years ago, he obviously is good enough to hold down a roster spot in the NFL. Shannon Summers joining us from the Silver Bullets podcast. Join him right there at silverbulletspodcast.com for the best in Ohio State football coverage. All right, Shannon, this game against Wisconsin, we saw the Badgers last year. It was a game in Madison. Buckeyes down 10 in the second half, came back and rallied for an overtime win. This Wisconsin group, unfortunately, from my perspective, not getting the kind of respect that they deserve for going through a Big Ten schedule 12-0. Sure, they didn't schedule a non-conference game that you would like to see against an elite power, and they play in the Western Division and missed all but Michigan in the Eastern Division. But still, just the typical Wisconsin team, when you talk about maybe limited playmakers on the outside, questionable quarterback play, but man, what a running game, what a running back in Jonathan Taylor, and defensively as fundamentally sound and strong and nasty as you can get.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to take away from the Badgers this year. I mean, especially at the beginning of the season. Before the season started, they lost Jack Cincy, I think is Sitchy, one of their linebackers for the season. I think it was like the first or second week of the season. They lost another linebacker. They've lost a starting wide receiver. And they just keep on ticking, and they definitely have that next man up mentality. And I agree with you that I think that they're not getting the respect nationally that they should. I honestly feel that they should at least be ranked third above Oklahoma because of the injuries. And, I mean, it's your Power 5 team and you've gone undefeated. Sure, their schedule hasn't been great, but at the same time, they just got them playing that, the roughest schedule last year. So it's, some give or take. The youth of Wisconsin from last year, losing to the Buckeyes, like you were saying, being down, coming back and winning. They're a year older, but I expected Alex Hornibrook to take a step up, be a better quarterback. He's still having issues as far as interceptions and, that. So it's going to be a fun game to watch. Their defense is definitely, I think it's ranked number 1, and you have players like Dakota Dixon, Nick Nelson, Alec James, Connor Sheehy. I mean, these guys are, really good players, and I think they're averaging only giving up 80.5 yards a game on the ground, and their pass efficiency is one of the top in the country. But at the same time, you have to look at their schedule, like you mentioned. I think the highest ranked team offensively that they've played so far is in the 80s. They're going to be playing a number 4 offense in the nation this weekend. So it's going to be a fun game, fun matchup.
It is going to be fun because Wisconsin, this is a typical Wisconsin team, as I tried to outline. And I think Urban Meyer did at one point on Monday during his news conference to say, we're seeing the same thing that we always see with Wisconsin on tape. And he just kind of outlined, especially defensively, what they see and the offensive line play. But yeah, they have a number of active defenders under defensive coordinator Jim Leonard's scheme. And it is difficult to analyze this offense because I don't want to discredit what they've accomplished because they play the team in front of them. And they've certainly played a few teams, meaning Iowa, Northwestern in particular, that are capable of putting up big numbers and have against decent teams. But they haven't, yes, they didn't see Oklahoma, that's for sure. They haven't even seen Penn State offensively, or now they're going to see the Buckeyes, who in terms of all the power indexes, efficiency, both offensively and defensively, as you well know, Shannon, are rated by the metrics much higher than their two losses would indicate. The metrics say that this is arguably the best team in the country.
Yeah, you want to sit there and say that they definitely are, but that Iowa loss, that was unexcusable. It was just, I mean, you can't make any excuse for it. It was unacceptable. And I don't even know how to put that one into, terms or anything, but defensively, they do have issues, especially their linebacker play against tight ends. And they're going to be going against a very good tight end this weekend, which for some reason his name's
Troy Fumagalli.
Yes, that's it. And, then you have Jonathan Taylor, who has over 1,800 yards so far, and he's a true freshman. So, I mean, they're going to have their hands full. And you've seen at the beginning of the year, their secondary was just getting torn up. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot on their plate when they face the Badgers, even though the Badgers aren't ranked as high offensively. But they still pose a big problem for the Buckeyes and big concerns for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, Fumagalli with 38 catches, he's in line for one of the major tight end awards. Who did they name that after? Maybe Dave Casper. I don't remember exactly who's got the tight end. John Mackey Award. I think that's what it is off the top of my head. The John Mackey Award, Fumagalli up for that out of the Big Ten. The one, we can discredit the defense to a certain extent. And again, if you look year to year over going back to Barry Alvarez and certainly during the Bielema and Anderson years, and now with Christ in play on the sideline, Wisconsin's front seven on defense is always stout. Maybe not quite the NFL talent that Ohio State has and some other teams across the country, but they play some tremendous football. The one strength versus strength, you could say Wisconsin has shown itself to be extremely stout with another elite group on the other side would be what Jonathan Taylor did in the ground game against Michigan. We know that it was difficult for the Buckeyes to run for most of the game against the Wolverines. Then the dam broke and they really hit some big plays in the fourth quarter. But before that, it was difficult sledding for the Buckeyes from the running back position in particular. But Jonathan Taylor ripped up the Wolverines 19 carries for $132. So they can pound it with the best of them.
Yeah, and the thing with Michigan, as you pointed out, too, the same thing happened with the Wisconsin-Michigan game. The fourth quarter came around, and because Michigan doesn't have that depth and that rotation as like in Ohio State, their defensive line is exhausted. I mean, you look at the Ohio State-Michigan game, and I think Hurst played every play on defense except for maybe 3 or 4. So by that fourth quarter, he's extremely exhausted because he's not getting any kind of rotation. Whereas with Ohio State, the defensive ends, the defensive tackles, you're getting a ton of rotation in there. So by the time the fourth quarter comes around, they're actually getting better because they're fresh.
What amazes me, Shannon, about the Wisconsin program, and I'll put Michigan State into the same category, is that we look at the recruiting rankings each and every year, and Wisconsin and Michigan State are typically pulling in classes that are 30th and 35th in the nation. Ohio State's always in the top 3 to 5 in the country. Michigan now with Jim Harbaugh in play, and even when they were down, were pulling in top 15 classes. Now with Harbaugh in play, they're more like top 5 to 10 classes. And Wisconsin continues to show up at the Big Ten championship game. I know they play out of the West, but just look when, as you well know I'm not preaching to you, Shannon, since Urban Meyer came to Columbus in 2012, aside from the 59-0 game, you're talking overtime in 2012. You're talking a touchdown game in 2013, the overtime game last season. Wisconsin has built a top 10 to 15 program by developing players, not getting the blue chip guys, but developing them. And it's quite a thing to behold. It has to be, it's mighty impressive from a talent development standpoint.
Oh, it definitely is. I mean, you mentioned Michigan State. I mean, Michigan State went 3-9 last year and had all the offseason issues with the sexual assault on the players and whatnot. And Mark D'Antonio kept the team together, and then they turned around and they're 9-3 this year with the redshirt freshman. Oh, and their team was just about as young as the Michigan Wolverines. And they tied for first in the Big Ten East. Wisconsin, they have a great system in place, and it's been working for them, like you said, ever since Barry Alvarez has been there. And if it's not broke, don't fix it. So, I mean, it's something that has been very successful, and you have to, tip your hat to Barry Alvarez and Paul Christ and his coordinators and everybody for keeping the system going and keeping everything on track.
All right, we got Shannon Summers on the line from silverbulletspodcast.com. Join him right there where he talks Buckeyes nonstop. All right, Shannon, how's it going to play out in Indianapolis on Saturday night?
I think this is going to be a defensive game, and my prediction so far has been 17-14 Ohio State. Wow. I think we got to win.
Okay, Buckeyes win it over the Badgers 17-14, and despite 59-0 being on everybody's mind, that just sticks out because that pushed Ohio State into the first ever college football playoff. Keep in mind that Wisconsin's made it very, very difficult every other matchup against Urban Meyer's team since he arrived in Columbus. Shannon, we appreciate the breakdown and enjoy the game and championship weekend.
Definitely will, and thanks for having me on.